All right, guys, so I just wanted to give an update on the conference realignment because let me just say there's a bunch of crap that came out yesterday about the Magnificent Seven. Sounds like a movie. Clemson, FSU, Miami, North Carolina, NC State, Virginia, and Virginia Tech are the 7 ACC schools that have met in the past several months with lawyers examining the grant of rights to determine just how unbreakable it is, with that dreaded ACC deal running through 2036. So guys, remember, just to catch people up on this timeline, I had said last year, with the SEC deal being announced a few seasons ago, with the Big Ten getting their crazy deal, some of these bigger teams in the ACC are going to wake up one day and realize, yeah, this sucks. We have a horrible TV deal and it runs for over a decade. This is just not going to happen. So Clemson, FSU, Miami, North Carolina, I speculated all those teams would be in on trying to restructure, maybe doing something like unequal revenue distribution. It's just, can they get enough teams to actually move forward with it? And it looks like NC State, Virginia, and Virginia Tech could be the other teams. They do have a few different options. And then we do also have stuff coming out about the Pac-12. What's going on with their TV deal? Are they just going to rot on Fubo TV or whatever the streaming service is? It's not looking good for the Pac-12. I know their fans are trying to cope. They're trying to say, we're going to get something. They were saying maybe ESPN was still interested, but it's not looking likely. If the Pac-12's new TV deal is crap, it's mainly based on streaming, I definitely see Washington and Oregon looking at the Big Ten, and then you get kind of some of those other teams like your Colorados and your Utahs. If Oregon and Washington go to the Big Ten, the other teams possibly could follow to the Big 12. But there you can see FSU, Clemson among 7 teams examining the grant of rights. 7 ACC schools have met with lawyers to investigate the possibility of getting out of the dreaded deal. The Action Network and Sports Illustrated reporting those 7 schools have met. The ACC's exclusive media rights deal with ESPN runs through 2036, several years after the conclusion of the deals that soon begin for the SEC and Big Ten. The SEC entering their decade-long media deal worth $3 billion. So the SEC is getting so much more money than any of these ACC teams, and their deal is going to be done before this dreaded ACC grant of rights. And then you can see the Big Ten 7-year deal with NBC, CBS, and Fox for $7 billion. And I did see NBC already announcing a few games that will be airing on the network. I think Ohio State, Michigan State, NBC does such a good job. I'm really happy that NBC is involved with college football more than just the Notre Dame game. It could be an active summer, according to one administrator. I would certainly agree with that. The near year-long realignment buzz surrounding these two conferences, will the Pac-12 members defect to the Big 12, is entering what appears to be its final chapter. Over the next 2 months, more clarity is expected as the Pac-12's television deal is finalized. Now, this whole TV deal has been completely stretched out for the Pac-12. That cannot be a good sign. They were originally thinking maybe by the Final Four, even earlier, and here we are with the rumors. It's going to be mainly a streaming-based deal. Not a good sign for the Pac-12 if that is the case. The Big 12 versus Pac-12 territorial fight is one battle in a realignment war that has been waged for decades. So that is kind of the question. It just depends, what is the deal that the Pac-12 ends up getting? Is it good enough? And this is where the question really comes into play. For me, it's about Oregon and Washington. Because those other 4 teams that everyone keeps talking about going to the Big 12, the Big 12 right now is not very attractive. Like, if you're Colorado and you're looking at the Pac-12 versus the Big 12, and you get maybe a slightly worse TV deal, if Oregon and Washington agree to remain in the Pac-12, there's really no reason to go to the Big 12. The Big 12's issue With them losing Texas and Oklahoma, they've got no super blue blood powerhouse college football team. They really don't. They have a very deep conference, especially with the addition of the 4 new teams, but there is no Texas that is going to really elevate the conference to the next level in terms of marketability. The real problem for the Pac-12 becomes if the TV deal is mainly streaming, if it's a slightly worse TV deal than the Big 12, and you get Washington and Oregon that say, this thing sucks, we're going to be irrelevant. If you're Oregon, you've got the Nike connection. Why not go to the Big 10 as long as the Big 10 is open for business, which I think they are, because it would make sense for the Big 10 to create that West Wing. The scheduling gets much easier. You can have those teams kind of in their own pod face each other every year. I'm talking about USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington, if those are the 4 teams. Maybe even extend it with California, as well as maybe Stanford due to the academics. Either way, this situation hinges, to me, on Washington and Oregon. If Washington and Oregon leave, the Pac-12 is screwed, and the 4 teams that have been rumored to want to go to the Big 12, they would be much more likely to go to the Big 12. So this whole thing hinges on the deal, and then Oregon and Washington. But let's get to the big news. So this is the ACC. How can these teams get out of the grant of rights? What are their options? Their first option, seek additional revenue from ESPN, which this one seems, you would think on the surface, because of how ridiculous this deal is, you would think this is the most likely, but look at this. This is a long shot given the network's current situation. ESPN is in the midst of a wave of personnel cuts, also negotiating deals with the UFC and WWE, the NBA, and the Pac-12. Yeah, I would be very surprised. You know what? Maybe ESPN gets back into the Pac-12 because they want that extra window, but it would be surprising at this point if ESPN did get any sort of rights with the Pac-12. So, that seemed like the most likely option, but with ESPN kind of in a crunch, they're not going to be open to the negotiation table. Where does that leave these 7 ACC schools? Secede from the league. This becomes probably the most realistic option. Some of the schools, possibly the most frustrated, such as FSU and Clemson, could pay the $120 million exit fee and hope they can break a grant of rights agreement that most attorneys, though maybe not their own, say is airtight. And then that leaves a very big question. Where do they go? Which is what we will talk about in a little bit. I'm pretty confident that, well, actually, I would just be speculating, but I would say FSU and Clemson probably to the SEC. That's what I would say. But that would just be my speculation. And then the third option, create another league. Very, very unlikely. If the 7 agree to dissolve the current grant of rights agreement, which we don't know if it's even possible, they may add a couple more schools and begin their own association in hopes of a more lucrative deal. This comes with its own issues, of course. You need a broadcast partner or private equity to fund such an endeavor. So to me, the second option, because ESPN is really not open for renegotiation, even though they got such an amazing deal based off of what the Big 12 and the SEC currently have or are going to have in the future. This is a situation where the second option is the most likely. It's trying to break the grant of rights. Maybe you have to pay a massive exit fee if you're FSU and Clemson, but if those 7 schools can come together and pressure the ACC maybe to do some type of different distribution structure, that could be your one other option, and that is the fourth option. It will be further explored in the meetings, changing the revenue distribution model to a more merit-based system. For example, FSU gets like 7% of the revenue, while the estimates have them producing like 15% in terms of overall. So they're worth 15% of the ACC based on how much they produce in terms of revenue for the league, but they only get 7% because it's all equal. And there are also big problems that come with unequal revenue distribution in their own right. So this entire thing is a complete mess, and we will have to see what happens, but it's a situation where FSU and Clemson and North Carolina and Miami, these teams are looking at this and they're saying the Big Ten is getting a way better deal than us, and they're going to be back at the negotiating table before us because they only have a 7-year deal. The SEC has a 10-year deal that ends, I believe, in 2034. So the SEC is already getting more money than us, and their deal ends before ours. We have a terrible deal, and we're going to have to do something drastic. They should have never agreed to this, but we're at this point now. Listen, we'll have to see if they can get out of it. They formed 7 teams. And then how about this? We've got the Big 12 commissioner aggressively pursuing expansion targets in attempt to reach the 14 or 16 members and try and become a Big 3 conference along with the Big 2, the Power 2, the SEC, and the Big 10. Though San Diego State seems bound for the Pac-12, it is their preference. Yormark held conversations with the school's leadership about being the Big 12's only program in the Pacific time zone. UConn, the reigning men's basketball champions, is a play for a foothold in the Northeast, as well as adding another basketball powerhouse to what currently is the best hoops conference. So that is interesting, and that also says Memphis, the Tigers, possibly joining this league. At least they've been rumored. So those are 3 more options, it looks like right now, but it seems like San Diego State wants to go to the Pac-12, which would be such an amazing get for the Pac-12 if they're able to stabilize with the 10 core teams, keep Washington and Oregon, and then add a San Diego State and maybe a Boise State or a UNLV. I know it doesn't make sense, but it would, based on the TV numbers, based on popularity. UNLV is actually more attractive than Boise State, even though Boise State is a much better team in terms of college football. So that would be a really good job by the Pac-12. Looks like the Big 12 is exploring other options. Maybe UConn. They have a terrible football program, but they are slightly improving. And then they also do have a really good basketball team. And then Memphis. They're decent kind of in football. And then in basketball, they've been better recently. And then this is just kind of a fun little thing I found via Instagram. You can see the future of college football, just the projection, the teams that the Big Ten is adding. Looks like Oregon, Washington, Stanford, and California. That creates a full West wing, which I would agree with. I think that is possible. The SEC adding Clemson, FSU, North Carolina, and Duke. So that keeps the North Carolina-Duke rivalry. You don't want to split that up and put them in different conferences. That makes sense. You have the Big 12 with Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado. That was the original rumor last summer. You have the ACC changing things around, not by their choice, of course, but keeping Miami, which I don't know how that works out. I don't know if Miami would like that. And then they would have to add some teams. You can see Tulane, East Carolina added there. And then the Pac-12 completely changed. They get Fresno State, San Diego State, San Jose State, Utah State, Colorado State, SMU goes to the Pac-12, Texas State goes to the Pac-12, Rice and Tulsa, and then you still do have Oregon State, Washington State, and then also Boise State. It is just a fun little speculative thing. Miami is kind of seen as the wild card. What does Miami do? Where would they fit? I'm guessing if Miami were to go somewhere other than the ACC, if all hell broke loose, it would be to the SEC. I don't think they're a fit in the Big 10. I do not think they're a fit in the Big 12. So that is something that could also happen. It's interesting, this realignment does not have UConn or San Diego State or Memphis going to the Big 12. I'm guessing those are secondary options for the Big 12 at this point. If this did become the final model, let's say it's 2030 and this is what it looks like, to me there's clearly a Big 2, the Big 10 and the SEC. The second tier is the Big 12. I would say the third tier is the ACC, and then the Pac-12 would be the fourth tier with some of those teams like Texas State, Rice, Tulsa, at the way bottom. But even the ACC would get gutted in this situation. I kind of view what's going on right now as 2 different situations. The next big news out west will be the Pac-12's deal and how that affects Washington and Oregon, whether or not they like it, whether or not they're looking to leave, is the Big Ten interested in them? And then the other situation with the ACC, getting those 7 teams trying to find ways to get out of that horrible grant of rights or some sort of restructure to get the teams at the top more money and get them a better deal overall. So those are the 2 main things going on right now in college football, guys. That's going to do it for this video.